Great. Well, welcome everyone to our conversation about how we can upgrade our courses. And we're using the term upgrade because there's a lot of talk about going back to normal, and we don't want to go back to normal, whatever normal is. We want to do better. And so we brought together, I brought together my favorite people. There are other favorite people too who are not here, and including Angela and Elena. But these are some of my favorite people to talk about how we have made some changes to our courses that seem to be working, that feel right, that seem to be helping students succeed. And so we wanted to share some of that information. And we're hoping to share slides for about half of our session today, and then open it up and have a conversation about what you've done. And we'll probably have questions for each other as well. So that is the plan for today. All right. And please feel free to ask questions. You can unmute or throw them in the chat. Right. All right, so we're calling this What's in Your Upgrade? Using the lessons of COVID teaching and learning to upgrade our courses. And we will just go through, and how about each person can introduce themselves as we get to your slide. That sounds okay. All right, I'm going to take off the waiting room so we don't have to worry about it. All right. So in my upgrade, what I wanted to do was more videos and reflections. So I'm being sort of guided by some things that I've learned, things I've learned through watching some of the folks who are really at the forefront of equity in online education. And I've talked a lot, I think, this year about Michelle Pacansky-Brock, who was our fabulous speaker in Flex Week. And there are some other folks, Marites Apigo, and also, Fabiola Torres. So I've been following them on Twitter and also watching their videos. And so they've taught me that being a warm demander is important, which to me means making sure that I'm not lowering my standards, however, being very warm and welcoming for demanding a high quality of work. And also the idea of belonging, welcoming and belonging. And so thinking about those two things, I really have seen how much videos can help. So at the beginning of the year, I put a welcome video on my homepage and created a Liquid syllabus with that video. If you haven't used a Liquid syllabus, it is a web-based syllabus, that students can see on their phones. And as we learned from, I think, Michelle Pacansky-Brock, students are using their phones in community college much more than they're using, say, a desktop or a laptop computer. And so having a Liquid syllabus and having information and accessibility through a phone is actually an anti-racist practice. And so I know I need to do more with that, but that's one of the things that I made sure to have, at least the introduction to my course, this Liquid syllabus in a web-based format through Google Sites, very easily done through Google Sites, so that they could access it on their phones. Another thing I did was to create micro lectures, and instead of uploading an hour lecture, which I know from my children who are college students at home, they just despise and just cannot get themselves to watch. I created a series of short lectures. They are about 4 to 7 minutes each, and each module has maybe 4 of them. This way, it's not overwhelming. Students can watch a few, take a break, watch a few more, and it seems to be working pretty well. It takes a really long time to do this, but I created some slides and just have my face in the corner and talk through the slides as I would if I were giving a lecture. And then short explainer videos for assignments. I've never done this before, but in order to make assignments less scary, I just would create a video, an imperfect video on my telephone, or with just on using the PowerPoint or a Zoom video, just explaining how the assignment should go, what my expectations are, where they can find things, actually clicking through it. And people have said that's been helpful as well. So I'm definitely going to keep all those videos. Even when I go to online class, I'm going to try to keep as much video support as possible. And then finally, reflections and not quizzes. And so I decided that I wasn't really interested in like multiple choice anymore. And I don't know why I was ever really interested in it. But I created reflections assignments for each module rather than quizzes. And the reflections are open, and it's just, choose something that interested you and, talk about it. At first, sort of define it, talk about it. Did it change the way you thought about this, this subject? How does it pertain to you, right? How does it pertain to your life? And these reflections are incredible. Like, I so look forward to reading them every week. They clearly are, allowing the students to connect to things that they know in their lives, something familiar, which we've learned through like Hammond's book, some of the brain research, that learning comes when you connect it to something and then stretching it a little bit, right? And so I think that the reflections are a good way to do that. It's amazing what students, they always impress me with the depth of their reflections. So those are some of the things that I've done. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Mary.
Thank you. That was great, Laura. I have questions. Can I ask? No, I'll ask the question later about one of those things. So my upgrade theme, I guess, is focusing on being really intentional about creating community in an online classroom. So I've talked about community building in my class, like, since I started teaching, but I think that this COVID year has been the first, I've really been like trying very hard to do this in a way that I think is more intentional than previous years. And part of it came from, I think, I'm an adjunct. I teach history at a couple different campuses, and depending on the campus culture, there's a varying degrees of like how on board people were about going online, both students and faculty. And part of my desire to like be really positive about creating a community and celebrating online learning was because I've always found it really wonderful and I love it. And then just seeing like a lot of negativity and sadness surrounded it made me want to be like, it's so great, guys, let's get this, like, let's create a community. So I really kind of went all out with that, mostly for students, because they came in thinking that this was going to be like, am I going to be watching, an hour long video of my professor talking at me? And you aren't. You don't have to do that. So that was my kind of mission. I've been doing a couple things in with that larger goal in mind. Sorry, I have a lot of things going on right now. I started doing these feedback weeks. So in terms of it requires me sort of scaling back some of the content that I would usually be trying to do in my survey classes. And then just if they have a piece of an assignment due, so I do one long research project the whole semester where they're doing it in like specific components. So every time there's a component due, there's no extra content. There's nothing else except you turn it in and then you give feedback to your peers and then I give feedback to people. So it's like just a pause in everything else. The idea being that the students' work and their research and their writing is as important as the rest of the content. And it really sort of, it adds to the class itself. So everybody gets to see what people have been working on and how they're progressing. And it relates to my second little bubble there, which is that collaboration is at the basis of my class. And I use a lot of social annotation. So I use hypothesis. Everybody posts their work to a public Padlet, public in terms of the class, not public on the internet, but public in that way that you can read each other's, and then you can actually see the feedback too that I'm giving. So I post my feedback in the comment to the Padlet, and so trying to build up this community in that sense where I'm at responding to people's comments like, Katie had a good question for your paper. What do you think about this? So just trying to build it up so you're actually, they know that I'm paying attention and reading. They can see me online in many places. Same with Laura, was what you were saying about like putting your face out there and explaining the assignment, making sure that your presence is known. That's probably the most important thing that I've trying to cultivate more and more this year. And then that goes along with the last thing on my slide, which is the transparency and authenticity, just really explaining why I'm doing this and then asking for feedback from them and then listening to what they say and changing it if I need to. And that the feedback weeks thing came from a student of mine, actually, they didn't put it in that language, but their comment to me was like, this class was really interesting, but there's just too much stuff. I felt like I had enough time to really get into it. And I was like, well, that's not good. Like, let's just create a little bit of time so that we can all relax a little bit. Maybe that means cutting down some reading or picking and choosing the content in a different way so that everybody has a chance to get into it in their own pace, cultivate that joy and that excitement about it, and reiterate that online learning is good. It doesn't have to be boring and soul sucking. And then the last thing is the explicitly flexible policies. So this is something that I've been working towards for a while. This year, I just threw out no penalties for lateness. There's deadlines for things that I have in the language of having a grace period. So you have like a 2-day span to get things in. If you don't do it in that day span, there's no penalty, but it's just there if you need that framework. And then it's just been really nice to have like the pressure released, and I don't have to follow up with people and police them and take off points for something that doesn't have anything to do with their quality of work, just their life circumstances. All of that kind of works together to facilitate that community building. And it's really trying to put in the word for how online learning is like actually fun and exciting, and you can get to know people online, and it's not all just sitting and looking at the Zoom screen. Although Zoom, we're talking about Zoom is good. Javier, question. Do I get any resistance? Like it's too new age? Yes, somebody has called me new wave. I actually don't know if that was a compliment now that you asked me that. Yes, I mean, the resistance does not come from the students. I'll say that. It comes from other faculty maybe, but I really have only recognized good things coming out of this. Good things from the students. Quality of work is the same or better. There's just less anxiety for me, just all much better, so much better. So maybe resistance, but I don't really, it's okay. No one pays attention to what I do. Just keep going with it. All right, Laura, I think I'm done with my slide.
All right, thank you, Mary. Next up is Denise Meduli-Williams.
Hi, I'd set my timer because otherwise I'll just go on and on. So thinking about this presentation, I mean, if you know me, you know I have always loved online teaching. So when we went remote, I was like, yes, now everyone will see, it's amazing. And I was really excited. So I didn't want to really focus on that for this one. What I wanted to talk about was coming back to the classroom, because in most of the meetings that I've been in recently, everyone's like, let's get back. I can't wait. And then everything's just going to go back to normal. And I am really rethinking some of the things that I did face to face and asking myself, you're really gonna, like, for me, I'm taking the opposite side. Like, I'm gonna really have to be convinced that the things that I did face to face are really worth it. Like, I'm going remote first when I go back, and you're gonna have to really convince me, like, that small group discussion in class is better than what we did on Flipgrid. So when I say remote first for my students, and I teach English and ESOL, we call it ELAC in our district, it really is a much more equitable space, especially asynchronously for my English language learners, developing writers, anything like this. Any students who, like me when I was a student, was so fearful of speaking up and speaking out quickly with the time pressure of what was happening with the professor asking for an answer right away, or getting in groups and not really knowing anyone and then being pressured to speak, or like one or two students dominating even a small group discussion or the whole classroom discussion, and me needing more time to practice and prepare and then respond without feeling overwhelmed. The asynchronous space has been completely equitable for my students. So that video was Kimia, she was in one of my ELAC classes, and they were doing small group responses on Flipgrid, just about one of the readings. And the responses that they gave on the Flipgrid when they talked to each other was much more in-depth than what they would ever say in a classroom. And I also think about my English language learners who in a classroom in a small group discussion would kind of get like little bursts of language, but not complete sentences and thoughts and the depth of the response that they were able to prepare. So for me, for small group discussions and that's really a remote first stance for me. And even things that are kind of normal in the English classroom, like writing workshops, peer review, again, in class, that was very troublesome. People didn't finish reading what they needed to read from someone else in order to give the response. And then some people would be done and some people wouldn't, and you'd be waiting this whole thing, right? Whereas online, they have they take the time to read it. We go through writing responses, kind, specific, helpful feedback. They have the time to do that. They have time to peruse it and to respond and really apply it to their writing. So again, for me, why would I try to do that in a face-to-face session under pressure? I'm going to go remote first for that stance and really save the in-class interactive things for things that I think will make the most benefit for everyone. But from an equity perspective, the asynchronous space has been extremely inspiring for my students. I hear every student's voice, and the students who are quietest in class live are sometimes the quickest, and the model students online, they can give the first responses. The second thing that I found really fascinating during this time was in terms of active learning, because the lines were already blurring, as we know, between like home and school life. Like my kids know my students know my husband, my kids, my dog, like they're just all in it, right? So they're already blurred. So that second picture is my speaking class's final presentations. So we didn't get on Zoom and do a presentation like this. And in a normal regular class, they would have gotten up and done what they do, these Pecha Kucha presentations, which if you're not familiar with Pecha Kucha, I think I got that from you, Elena. I got that idea from you, so I'm glad you're here. They get 20 seconds and 20 slides, and it's really to teach them not to do like the death by PowerPoint presentation, and they do it on something that's inspiring to them and that matters. And we used to take like 3 class days to do this, because every student has to get up, they've got to turn the computer on, everyone's sitting there, people are bored. It like takes all this time away, right? So once again, you're going to have to convince me that 4 class meetings of sitting there is really, really worth it. So what they did was they presented to a home audience. And so people presented to their children, they're clapping and cheering. They presented to their roommates, to their spouses. There's so many presentations of people presenting to their cats and their dogs. Someone presented to their birds. One of my favorites is Henry Tran, who didn't live with anyone and had no pets, and he presented to his succulents, and he had them like lined up, and he presented. So they videotaped their live presentation to submit to me kind of as evidence, and so I could look through it. But they posted on the Padlet these pictures of everyone cheering for them, and we got to just see this home audience presentation. I will totally keep that. Of course, we'll do some in-person presentations, but why wouldn't I want to keep that like blurred community lines where they're doing active learning together? And then the last thing I'll say, because I'm already over 5 minutes, is that I really am going to streamline, because in my face-to-face classes, although I have a set syllabus and schedules and we know everything, everyday students would kind of show up and be like, what's going to happen? And it would just be the circus that is my class. Like, journaling obviously first, but then it was like get in groups and then get in pairs, and now we're gonna watch a video, and like, oh, let's go outside, and just like all this fluff and stuff and activity. But really the beauty of consistency. So like I began every week with a 60-second video on Instagram. I use clips, and we had just moved, and I had literally not showered in 3 days. We had moved, and I had been up till 3 a.m. So I used that filter of the tiger, but I had just gone in 60 seconds through the week of exactly what we were doing. And I think the consistency is something that I will bring back to face-to-face, which I was never that organized face-to-face. I was like, let's just show up and it's going to be a party. And then tomorrow we'll see what happens. Even though I knew what we were going through, it was always different. And I think consistency for me in terms of planning and consistency for students is going to be a big help face-to-face. I went over a minute, sorry. Next.
Thank you, Denise. All right, next is Britt Highland.
Okay, so I teach physics, and I teach the physics for the bio pre-meds, and I also teach physics for the engineering majors, the computer science, the math majors, the chemistry majors, aerospace, etc. This has been really tricky going online, especially for the labs. The lecture part, I switched to a flipped classroom. It has been fabulous. I wasn't really going to talk about that here because a lot of people have talked about flipping their classrooms. If anyone's interested in talking about flipping a science classroom, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But the thing that I really kind of got hung up on, and it's actually been bothering me since I was a student. So this is something I've been chewing on for a long time, is, are exams really that great of a way of assessing student knowledge? And if not, what do you do instead? I do think that there is some benefit to exams in a science class. There's a certain amount of knowledge that people have to have moving to go forward, and I need to know whether or not they have it, they get that. The problem I have is making the exam worth 40 or 60, the exams as a whole, 40 or 60% of someone's grade. There's been a big push on the, I'm blanking on the word right now, growth mindset, on applying a growth mindset for STEM classes and for anything in general. And a lot of people are really behind that, but then they still make the exams worth 40 or 50% of the grade. And that seems really kind of contradictory to me, because you're still evaluating people for their performance on one day for something that may or may not be that realistic. So what I wanted to do was kind of figure out about how to deal with labs online, in the online environment, and do better with exams, and sort of combine those two problems and see if I could find a solution. I don't know if I found an actual solution, but this has worked pretty well for the last couple semesters. So I still give exams. There's a whole other conversation about how to write a useful exam, which I'll not talk about here. But the exams as a whole are only worth 24% of their grade. So instead of having, originally I had 3 exams over the semester, which was 45%. Now I have 4 exams, which are worth 24%. So each exam is only worth 6% of their grade, which lowers the pressure quite a bit. But I have to make up that difference. So I was like, well, okay, what about doing something real for lab? There are lab reports, and they have those, there's individual labs each week, and that's a separate category. But what if we did something that was a little bit more useful going forward for your upper division classes, or for what you might do in a research setting? Because I'm going to admit, I was a chemistry and a physics major. I took a lot of labs as a student. None of them were useful to me when I actually started doing research. Like the way research was done is not the way a lot of teaching labs are taught. And that's frustrated me for years. So how can I do better? So I introduced this idea of lab projects. I give 3 of these over the course of the semester for a total of 21% of the grade. So each one is worth 7%. One lab project is comparable to one exam as far as the grading goes, which gives them the motivation to do it. It actually counts. And for each of these projects, I give them 3 options. They only have to pick one. They can pick whichever one they like best. There's a programming one because I have a lot of computer science students. There's a hands-on one, and then there's what I call an analysis one. I give them a peer-reviewed journal article. I give them specific things to look for. They read the paper, they know how to answer the questions. The thing I really like about these though, is I don't have them turn in a paper. It's not a formal paper. They turn it in by signing up for a 15-minute Zoom meeting with me and we discuss it. They don't turn in their code. They show me their code. If they do the programming one, they show me their screen. I have them walk me through it line by line and tell me, what did you do and why did you do it? If they did the experimental one, maybe they have to share their screen for data. Maybe they just have to tell me their process. What did you do? Why did you do it? What happened when it didn't work? What did you do instead? Like if it didn't do what you expected, what did you do instead? What was your thought process? For the analysis one, for the paper, it's kind of, I give them the questions beforehand, but those are actually really interesting because a lot of times they come into it and they're like, I didn't quite know the answer to this. And so then we have a discussion about it. It's only 15 minutes, but we actually have a back and forth. If they're kind of just reading through the paper, I can stop them and be like, wait, what does that really mean? And again, we get to have a discussion. And so there's a little bit more of that personal interaction. And it is just a one-on-one meeting for these. It's not in front of the whole class because I really don't want the pressure of performing to be an issue for this. I want it to be low stakes, but to actually be useful. And they seem to get a lot out of it, honestly. A lot of them are like, I never really realized that people did this kind of research. I give them this journal article and it talks about things that they didn't realize people did and they get excited about it. We get to have an actual discussion. They get to see me, talk to me as a person. They don't have to worry about being right or wrong to a certain extent. If they don't know the answer to something, they do lose a point, but the emphasis is really on their process, which I think is in STEM is more important than we realize. And it's not something that gets taught in classes very well. Hopefully going forward, that'll change, but especially with traditional exams, you either get the answer right or you get it wrong. And even if it's a problem, you still get the problem right or wrong. Even if you get partial credit, maybe you just got the wrong answer. So this is really, I think, more useful for that, the growth mindset, the critical thinking, that kind of thing. It's teaching things I think are more important, maybe not more important, but as important in a STEM class as just knowing what the material is. And it seems to be working fairly well. A lot of times the students are like, I've never had this option in a science class before, and they kind of leave it to the last minute because that's how these things go. But for the most part, they're pretty interested in it. And the other thing that really stands out is a lot of times they come into it and they actually apologize. They're like, you should actually take off more points because I didn't come into this prepared. There's sort of that, they hold themselves accountable for the assignment, which is not something I've seen before with like traditional homework assignments or traditional lab reports or traditional exams. So this was something I did when we went online because I wanted to make sure there was interaction between me and the students, and I wanted to do something with labs to make them a little bit more realistic. I'm hoping to somehow continue this when we go back face to face. The logistics of setting up the meetings, this is what I love these pedagogically. In practice, every time a lab project week comes around, I'm like, oh really? Because it's hard for me because I have 14 or 15 of these meetings in a row. And while the benefits far outweigh the costs, getting this to work in person is going to be a little bit tricky, but it's been such a big success in my physics class that I'm going to try to do something with it moving forward. Just seems like a more authentic assessment.
Great, thank you so much, Britt. All right, next we have Marty.
All right. Let's see. A lot of the things that I've been kind of working on in my upgrade have been touched on in different ways. I first of all want to say that community and flexibility are bolded only because I forgot to bold these other two, not because they're more important. But the so before COVID, like many of us, I think on this call, I was part of that Strong Workforce Research Institute, which completely ended up becoming one with COVID for those of us that were in that. And so the things that I was like looking at starting and changing in the way I was kind of looking at my classes and teaching just all ended up molding into working on a fully remote and online environment, because that's what we ended up with at the same time. But some of the things that I was really focusing on and that have continued to focus on and will be hopefully finding ways to carry through when we go back to campus is, well, obviously keeping student success at the very forefront and figuring out how to wrap that around community flexibility, the process of learning, and that student ownership of knowledge, and taking from, I think, just from spending a lot of time with student services folks, those wraparound kind of really nurturing what they refer to as, at first I found it really off-putting, but those intrusive high touch contact, because I've found that doing that has kind of kept me connected to students that I might have lost otherwise. Not to say that there isn't still kind of students that drift away, but kind of having that frequent kind of what I would find to be really intrusive contact is actually really helpful. So that building community has been something I've been really working a lot on, because as a student myself, when I was in theater, I loved community. It was all about community. But once I switched over to science, it was pretty much an isolated, lonely world. And so really building and focusing on community through me being open with the students and working with providing opportunities online for students to collaborate. A lot of, like what Mary said, using things like Padlet and using lots of breakout, where I would talk for a little bit and then we'd break out into rooms for students to talk together, come back and see where we are, and moving on, using Answer Gardens. I've still not figured out how to have group projects in a fully asynchronous class be successful. I'm still working on that. So I'm eager for any ideas that anyone has. But in the remote classes that are synchronous, I've really had great success with group interactions and small group projects. And I'm really happy that what I was doing on campus has been able to grow and continue in the online environment. Flexibility. I have, for my whole career, had a battle with late policies. I would create these late policies, and then I personally was unable to even keep up with my own late policy. How could a student possibly? I'd be like, there'd be this deduction per day late that I would then know. I mean, what was a day, and how do I? So my late policy is, life happens. Let me know when to expect your assignment. We'll work together to create a date that works for you. And that, I'm very happy with that. That seems to work well. Although, unfortunately, today I did hear from a student who contacted me about a late assignment. Unfortunately, our class ended on the 15th. So that didn't work out so well. But I think my biggest moving forward, and that I've embraced, is the process of learning. I love process, and I love the process of learning. I think that's why many of us have been in education, at least that's why I've been in education my whole life. And the process of learning for me has resulted in, embracing feedback and revision, and the opportunity to take feedback, make changes, move forward, and try again. And so I've kind of infused that throughout most of my class and in many different ways throughout assignments, whether it's to revise, to be kind of fearless with taking chances. And I have gotten more participation in different ways than I've had before. Like my classes have tend to have a lot of participation, but now it's really, whether it's through the chat box, whether it's, turning on your mic, whether it's with the camera on, with the camera off, there's just, I like keeping that. So I really do hope that we get to have an opportunity for some sort of synchronous hybrid opportunity when we're back online, because I do think that having the opportunity to communicate through a chat feature has really empowered a lot of voices. And so I would love to see that continue. And working on people leaving class with what they know and feeling like they own what that they know. So I provide a lot of opportunities now for ways in which to meet learning objectives. And that's kind of my next, I guess, task, is to take my learning objectives. I mean, they're connected to all my assignments, but find, like these are the things you could choose from to meet this objective for this course. And you choose the assignment. That's kind of where I'd like to see that go. I'm not quite there yet, but kind of owning what you know and feeling good about that ownership of knowledge, especially for the more of the survey courses. And so those are some of the things. I got very distracted by Simon here, the cat that has joined me. But yeah, I won't miss. I will enjoy when I have a little bit more time to make videos, because right now it is the one and done. And I have so many videos where I kid you not, like, I don't know what it is with Canvas. When I upload that video to get the captioning, I inevitably end up with something like this as the cover shot. And I do look forward to not having that. I would love to be able to get like a frame where it's not like that. So that isn't something I'll miss.
Thanks, Marty. All right, moving on to Ken Reinstein.
Hi, and I have to say, full disclosure, when we all went off campus, my first reaction was, oh, shit. And because for a long time I had, resisted going online. I thought, no, I'm going to be traditional. And I'd say maybe about a year before we did go offline, I did start thinking about, well, maybe I really should consider, learning online. And, I think like most of us, I did find it difficult at first, but now that I've been doing this for over a year, my reaction is like, why have I not been doing this for years now? I mean, I've learned so much, and there's no way I'm going to go back to doing it the old way, such as it was when we do return. And there was a lot. So when Laura was, asked me to do this, yeah, I jumped on the opportunity, and I looked at what some of the other people said are like, oh, they already did what I was going to think, So I think I've heard some really fantastic stuff today. And before I start, I just want to say, Marty, what you said about process, I love that. Because when I was a student at UCSD, I had a professor who said that it was from an English class, that there's no such thing as writing, there's only rewriting. And so I try to tell my students that, when you turn in an assignment, when you turn in a paper, it's just a milestone. It's a marker where you are. It's not the end goal. It's just, this is where you are at this point. Anyway, I digress. But the three things that I thought of for me, one would be more low stakes and no stakes assignments in my classes. And I know that learning online is stressful enough for students. And so I wanted to find some apps, some that I used even before we went online, including Perusall, but I picked up a few like Jamboard and Quizlet. And I do make a lot of really low stakes, even no stakes assignments here. And I sometimes even give students a free pass on a handful of them when it comes time for grading. So if they do everything, then they really get some extra credit. Though if they miss a few, it's not going to affect their overall grades. And by the way, I teach English and ELAC. And so ELAC students tend to be very stressed out and very concerned about grades. It's a major source of anxiety for them. But also with Perusall and with Jamboard, it gives me an opportunity to provide them some feedback, like some of you have said, with that kind of social work, that kind of annotation, and during class time. And I find that the summation of all their work and all these low stakes and no stakes assignments is generally consistent with their quality of the work overall in their major assignments. And they serve really as kind of preparation and practice for when they take exams or turn in their papers. The second one is less is more. And because I'm an English professor, really, I'm going to say fewer is more, because I think of fewer overall lessons and assignments. But I want to make something clear. This doesn't mean that my students are getting the discount or light version of the class, not at all. It means as the target suggests that I spend more time on the bullseyes or the more important competencies. Those are the ones that are generally most directly related to the student learning outcomes. And then since going online, I had to toss or modify a lot of what I did in my face-to-face class and re-engineer some of my lessons for online, rather than trying to, square peg some of those same lessons for Canvas. So when I plan something, I ask myself, is this going to be the best use of my time? Is this going to be the best use of the students' time? And will it get the best return on investment, from learning online? And so this rigorous reflection, involves a kind of balancing act. I want to respect the students' time and the challenges they contend with for online learning, but also ensure they get adequate rigor. So while there may be less material, the idea is to take deeper dives into what we do cover. The last is practicing mindfulness and self-care. And while this may not seem something directly from the classroom, it can, of course, that mindfulness and self-care can, of course, have a huge impact on how you teach and how you, go about your everyday life and how you interact with students. And I think by way of explanation, when we were on campus, I would regularly go to the Miramar Fitness Center for about an hour or so, 2 or 3 times a week, just for some exercise. And I consider this my me time. It's when I could put aside my busy schedule and attend to my physical and my mental health. But after the shutdown, there was no gym to go to. And there's even a gym here at the townhouse that I live in, but shut down too for now. So I was now shut in my home office. I didn't exercise as much. And because I was so busy and the gym wasn't available. And there was so much to do. The line separating home from work became blurred. Not only blurred, it became erased. And I started falling into some bad habits. I would work for long hours at a stretch and feeling burned out by the end of the day. I would make these to-do lists that would never get, in fact, they just get longer, and I would never get anything done. So finally, what I started doing is making schedules and time blocks. Say, okay, I'm going to work on this for, say, 30 minutes or 60 minutes and stick to that. And so I'd do these stretches where I'd work for 25 minutes or so and then take a 5-minute break. And that break could be stretching or breathing or just a short meditation. And at least once a day, I'll take, a 20-minute stretch for a guided meditation or a nap, or even just working on the New York Times crossword puzzle. And I don't feel guilty about it because it's something I've already scheduled in. I exercise maybe 3-4 times a week, and I try to stick to that. One thing I see that I think Elena put in there, my wife is always trying to make sure that I take at least one day off every weekend. And that could mean just sitting and watching television, just not actually doing any work. And it's been tough, but I've been getting there. I've been better at kind of just taking that time off. I'd like to finish here with something that the Buddhist monk and master of mindfulness, you may know him, Thich Nhat Hanh, once said, which is about, while washing the dishes, one should only be washing the dishes, which means that while washing the dishes, one should be completely aware of the fact that one is washing the dishes. So when you are planning your history lecture, when you're grading that exam, do only that. Do not think about anything else. Stay focused, stay in the moment, and be absorbed by it. And I haven't mastered it. But I try to be fully engaged in what I'm doing and not about anything else, so I can stay focused and calm at the moment. I think what this has done is helped me, at least I'm kind of starting to be a little bit more productive and trying to break some of those old habits that I had pre-COVID. But I hope to take some of that back with me when we go back to campus. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Denise says she was washing dishes while having a meeting with you the other day.
Ken literally goes, "What's that noise?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm washing dishes."
It's true.
What were
Like,
you
what do you
thinking
mean? Do you
about?
think I would just be sitting here talking to you? No, I also have things in the dryer, and I saw a text from a student. That was a good note to end on, Ken. I will remember that. I will try to remember that.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I'm breathing better just listening to you talk about those things. All right, so at this point, we would like to open it up to questions and sharing. If anyone has questions for any of the panelists, or if panelists have questions for each other, I know I've got a few. So you can go ahead and unmute. If you would like to raise your hand, that's okay too. We're all friends here, I'm sure we can work it out. Can I start? Sorry, Denise, this is for you. So when you say remote first, I want to know more about how you're thinking of, like, when we go back to campus, do you mean that you're going to argue that you would like your classes to remain remote? Or will you, when we go face to face, retain a lot of the remote things you're doing until you're convinced that it's better the way we used to do it, or in a face-to-face scenario?
I think it's a little of all of that with nuances. So, I mean, I was already, heavily incorporating tech and had been, we had already piloted the first online ELAC class before COVID hit. So we were ready for that and had been teaching online and hybrid things already. But I think that some of the things that I just always hear about is being like the heart of active learning in the classroom, like breakout groups live. Like, I really wonder about that. Like, it's not like I'll never do that, but I think that those have worked so well asynchronously for my students, having that time and not having a couple students dominate conversations, that I think that I will make sure to do both, in a more intentional way. And I do, just in terms of like face-to-face versus remote, I just think we should remember that online courses were on the rise before COVID. And I think that the latest statistics before COVID were like 1 in 5 students were taking had self-selected themselves to take at least one class online at every semester during, because community college students, it's such a huge privilege to be able to be on campus for all classes face to face. That if you are working, if you are, returning students, if you're a parent. The semester that we went on remote that fall, I had 2 students that were pregnant that said they were going to, they were due mid-semester. I talked to my dean about whether they continue, and the answer was no. Like, they cannot, because they won't be able to be here in class face to face, even though I had, Canvas shells and they could still somehow do stuff. But then it was like, the beauty of COVID for them was they continued on, and like now their kids are like a year old and they just continued their education. So I hope that we'll remember that students have always been choosing online classes for some options, some students, not all students. And so it's, it wasn't like no one was taking those, those class numbers were rising heavily. But for me personally, I'll teach both in all modalities. I love my face-to-face classes, but I will be more intentional on what we actually do during that time in class. Like that hour and a half that we're together, like what are we really doing that matters, that we need to be face-to-face for?
Thank you. Yeah, Maggie.
Hi, everyone. I'm an adjunct in the art department. I teach all of the art history classes at Miramar and a variety of other schools. And thank you all so much for your tips. I was taking like furious notes on all the different tips and tricks that you guys suggested. And I really want to look at moving beyond just the basic like Canvas shells as well. So I've also really appreciated hearing feedback on different software and tools that you've been using. And what I've really missed is the kind of face-to-face conversations, especially in an art history class where so much of it revolves around seeing things in really close detail, and also taking my students on trips to museums and to galleries, and then bringing in objects and talking about physicality. So I don't know, maybe this might be something for Britt with labs, or like things that used to feel really important that had to be hands-on. I've had a really hard time switching that to the online modality, especially because I have to teach all of my classes completely asynchronous. I have a baby and it's just me and him at home all day while my husband's at work, and like synchronous just does not work. I can't have a Zoom meeting and like all of a sudden he's taking a nap right now and I hope he stays down. That just doesn't work out for me. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any suggestions on what they felt has really worked in an asynchronous or offline setting that then they can bring back online. I really like the small group discussion options or small group work that they can work on over time. and maybe how long those projects worked. Like, do you give them a week? Do you give them a couple of days? Do you give them, like, how long does that seem to work out for? Because right now, all my classes, I feel like are still very isolated, that I don't have enough peer-to-peer or student-to-student engagement because I've had to rely on something that was completely asynchronous. So if anybody has any suggestions or experience with things that they felt really worked out well, because that's the thing that I'm having the hardest time with when I'm thinking about planning my fall classes that I know are also still going to be completely asynchronous and completely online. How do I make those little features maybe a little bit better now that I have a couple weeks of downtime to think about it coming up? And any helpful hints or suggestions would be appreciated.
I have a I have an idea, but maybe Ken, I know Ken uses Perusal. Perusal, well, I love social annotation. To me, that really is like the tool that has prompted the most student to student interaction. Because I use a lot of primary documents, and I give them like basically questions to consider in the margins that people are responding to, and then they respond to each other, and then they can use like emojis and GIFs to, so it's kind of like a less formal, more free-flowing sort of interaction. Perusal, I use Hypothesis. Perusal, I know you can annotate an image. You can like highlight different pieces of an image. Can't do that with Hypothesis yet, but that's like an option for getting them to interrogate different pieces, art pieces, and then having them respond to each other. With Hypothesis, I know you write something and somebody replies to you, you get a little note that they replied. So it's like prompts you to go back and check the discussion again, and sort of cultivates that presence between, or an interaction between the students, and then between the instructor and the students too. So that's my plug for annotation as a tool.
Yeah, just like Mary said, I know Mary uses Hypothesis, I use Perusal, and in my ELAC class, my students actually have had to provide, or contribute to a discussion, make social annotations on actual images. In fact, we were doing a lesson on Vincent van Gogh. So I would put images from, some of his paintings up there, and they could just tag those and make comments, and then students could, respond. In fact, I showed Perusal to one of your colleagues, Josh Alley, and I think he might be using it for his class.
Maggie, I did put in the chat that for like small group discussions, I usually do a week, on a topic. So, and I don't, the main discussion can get really unwieldy, and I like to have students like for 4 weeks at a time with a small group. They get to know each other, and then they like go to another group for the next 4 weeks. And I usually have them post something like midweek and then respond to all 3 in their group later in the week, and then kind of continue that conversation. And something like Padlet, I think you had asked about that. I think would be cool for some of the art things. Like they could post, you could post an image or something that they're supposed to kind of analyze and look at or share. Like those types of things can be more visually appealing, I think, for students in a class like art history, possibly than the discussion board. But I do like, definitely these hands-on classes are definitely trickier online. I think you have to go outside, like you said, go outside. Just like that built-in Canvas shell. And then for asynchronous, I think you just build in that time you have to be intentional in building in interaction. Otherwise it just becomes like this back and forth between you and the students, right? Like they read this and then they turn this in. And so that definitely takes more time to build.
I could say one thing a little bit, just coming from a lab perspective. So that's something actually that students were really upset about after that first semester that we went online. They're like, these labs suck. And they're just like, I hate this. And I was like, yeah, me too. So, and again, this is kind of specific to labs, but there's a software thing called Pivot Interactives, which someone else, I think is Vernier Scientific, made lab videos where the students can actually, they watch the video, and it's not a bad video. It's actually like they can do it frame by frame and take measurements. And then once they take the measurements, then it's just do the regular old data analysis you would be doing in a regular lab. I don't know if there's something equivalent to that that you could use, like maybe video tours of museums or something like that. But the lab videos that I didn't make them, because if I did, my hands would be in the way and they could never see anything. And it would be like an hour of me rambling and not actually, them not getting anything out of it. They watch the video, they click through it frame by frame, they take the data. And so the way I do labs, I actually do make them, I have the option of making it synchronous. And so that helps. They have to show up at least for part of it. But I think one of my colleagues, Jay, he has them do it in a group. And so they have to set up their own group time to meet. And then they use like Google Sheets and Google Docs and they collaborate that way. And so that gets some interaction on, they watch something, they collect the data, they interact either on their own over Zoom, or a lot of them use Discord. I kind of stay out of their group Discord chat, but a lot of them have that and use it. Or through like the Google Docs and Google Sheets, they can collaborate that way. So I don't know if that helps.
I do use the group feature in Canvas. And the only thing I don't like about the group feature in Canvas is that there is absolutely no way for me to go into the student view mode and have it look the way it looks for them. So I am not able to create a video or in any way model how they get into their groups. I have to have another student do it. So that is hard for me to show fully online students that are asynchronous how to use the group feature, because I cannot get the groups to appear where it appears for them. But the students who are able to use it and figure it out, it's great, because then it's got like, they can share files, they can share discussion boards, they can share all sorts of things in there. And then I can either choose to grade them as a group or grade them individually, and I can communicate with each group in there. They can have live interactions or asynchronous interactions. And I really enjoy it as a feature. I just wish Canvas would actually be able to have it in student view where we could actually see it the way they see it, so we could show them how to get to it, because that seems to be the biggest obstacle that students have with the groups features, where to find it.
I'll email Dave, because there's like a super secret account, fake test student account that he sometimes creates for things. And I had told him before that was amazing when I saw it, because then you could, and I was having that problem with peer review. Like I couldn't show peer review or make a video, and it was like, and I didn't understand what the questions were because I couldn't see it. And then he was like, let me just come in as this test student. And I was like, what? Because student view doesn't do that. But I'll mention it to him. But I mean, you're like the 5th person that's mentioned that. And I think that is a major, because we used to be able to do that with Blackboard. Everything else about Blackboard sucked, but that was good. So I'll see if I can ask that he makes more of those super secret test student accounts.
All right, well, unfortunately, we've already used up our hour, and some of us have to go to Academic Senate. So I would much rather stay here and talk about teaching. It's been so interesting, and thank you all so much for sharing your ideas. Let's keep chatting, right? Let's keep sharing ideas, and let me know, what kinds of things you would like me to do as PD coordinator. Like, for instance, this was originally Denise's idea. I reached out to her and said, what would you like to see in terms of the end of the year? And so any ideas that you have, I can, help facilitate them. So let me know what your needs are. And yeah, thank you everyone who participated today and who came. Have a great rest of your day.